it is such a pleasure for me to welcome Kateryna Protsenko back with us. She was one of the most successful speakers from our series last year. She's a teacher trainer. She's based in Kiev, but she's taught all over the world, really. And that's why she's so great. And she'll be talking to us today about how to help our students progress in bridging the gap after these months of lockdown. So thank you so much, Kate, for being here with us today. Thank you so much for attending, everyone, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Federica, for such a lovely introduction. And thank you very much, Macmillan, for having me here again and letting me do another webinar. And hello, everyone, and thank you very much for being here, for joining this webinar. And I know that we've all been working online and we've been spending quite a lot of time in front of our computers. And personally, I try and avoid my computer whenever I can, as much as possible. So another webinar is another hour in front of the screen. So thanks for giving me this time and this opportunity. So let's start. And today we're going to be talking about bridging the gap after the lockdown. And before we jump to the actual topic, it's important to answer one question, which is why? Why do we need to bridge the gap? And we've all taught classes where we had students who were not at the same level and not the same level of their ability. So, for example, some students were more fluent, some students were more accurate, some were better at reading, listening. Some students had a better knowledge of grammar. And we always aim to make sure the students progress at the same level. They don't get bored and they don't fall behind. This is becoming particularly important in the current situation because we all know that because of the COVID-19, we had to move online. And this just gave an additional challenge to some of our students. In the past, we had students who were not at the same level in terms of their skills they use in a face-to-face classroom. And so we added the computer skills, the ability to work online, the ability to type. And all those things just made it even more difficult for the students because we have like this amount of energy and we can either spend it on learning the language or on mastering the computer skills or on, both. So the gap is probably going to be even bigger. And so what do we do and how do we bridge the gap here? It's important to say that when we talk about the difference and we talk about the gap, it can be the gap in terms of the language level and ability, such as knowledge of the grammar and vocabulary, ability to read and things like that. It can be a difference in the learning styles, speed and aptitude. Some students write or type faster, some students are more visual, more kinesthetic. Some are more auditory type, although we now call them preferences, not styles. There can be a difference in background knowledge. Sometimes, or in a lot of cases actually, we have students who come with a different knowledge of life and the world. And for some students, our lessons are an eye-opening experience because they don't only learn the language, but they also learn a lot of things about the world. And I personally remember teaching some of my very first lessons and thinking, oh, that's some interesting information about a landmark somewhere in Mexico or somewhere else in the world. So there can be a difference in that. And definitely some difference in terms of the motivation. And here, when we talk about bridging the gap and differentiated instruction and the difference in the students, it's important to say that when we want to bridge the gap, we're not only talking about taking weaker students to a higher level and helping them progress faster. Here we also need to talk about the students who are fast finishers, who are more active, or the students who are at a higher level at this moment. And we want to make sure they remain motivated and that they are progressing and they are learning and not stagnating, and possibly that they're learning even more. So in this webinar, I'm going to touch on some of those, or actually I'm going to touch on all of those areas. And in this webinar, I'm trying to give you more practical ideas in terms of, here is an activity, what can we do, how can we adapt it to cater for various needs. And so we've defined the areas, we've defined those different areas, and let's talk about some more specific examples of the difference we've experienced in the classroom. For example, I often have students who are weaker, and they understand they are weaker, and they don't even want to try, they don't even want to participate. So in open class feedback, they will never say anything unless I call on them. What examples have you experienced? Okay, I'd like you to take a minute and send your ideas into the chat. Tell me what specific problems in terms of the difference in the students have you experienced? Okay, I'll just be quiet for a minute. And I'll see what answers I get from you. Okay, just the same experience, yes, okay. Some are more self-motivated than others. That's nice, that's good, yeah. That's actually quite common, yeah. All right, confidence levels, yes, absolutely. So it might not be about the level. The students might be strong but not confident. Shy students, yes, absolutely. Fear of making mistakes. Yeah, some students are have less fear, some students are more confident, some are less confident. Okay, good. I'm going to show you some of the things I have experienced, and if you have experienced all of those, okay, please send a plus into the chat. Okay. Good. I can see so many pluses. Very nice. That's very nice. Thank you. Good. Okay. It's very good to know that I'm not alone here and that those problems are common. And now let's see how we can deal with them and what we can do to help our students. It's important to say that when we talk about bridging the gap, we need to set the goals right. And by setting the goals, I mean setting the goals for an activity, for a lesson, and possibly for a full course or like an area. And this consists of three parts. First is the core work. And the core work is, say, the syllabus you have to follow and the areas you have to cover for the students to complete the course or a level. This is to say, when at the end of the course, the students get a test, they have to be able to complete a number of tasks to prove they've mastered the level. In addition to this, there needs to be some remedial work. And by this, I mean working with the gaps in the students' knowledge. Sometimes we have the students who come to our classes with some fossilized errors, which are there with them because of their experience. Sometimes the students have gaps in their knowledge because they picked up some of the language. They didn't learn it through formal or informal instruction. And this is quite common. And also the third component is the extra work, which we need to give our students. This can be some extra work for weaker students, which they need to do so that they get to the level. This could be some extra work we give to the stronger students so that they stay motivated or so that they progress even better. And all those three components are very important, and this is the basis of bridging the gap, or the differentiated instruction we do in class. And so we're going to look at some specific things we can do and some specific tips and tricks. And we're going to start from classroom management, as this is the very basic thing we do in teaching. So the first thing we do is we enter the classroom, whether it's an online classroom or a face-to-face classroom. And here, there's a number of things we can do to keep the students engaged and to make sure they are working, which is the essence of progressing. So first of all is the eye contact. And the eye contact is a very, very powerful tool which helps us with a number of things. First of all, when we establish the eye contact with the students, we tell them, I am here, you are here, I know you are here, and I'm listening to you. And this makes them feel that you are attentive to them. And if we don't establish the eye contact, the students might feel lost. I sometimes tell this story that when I just started teaching, I had a group of students, and I had some really strong and dominant students, and I was very shy, and I didn't want to establish the eye contact with those students. And at a certain point, this lady came to my director of studies and complained, saying that the teacher, me, the teacher is ignoring her and not giving her enough attention. And through questions, the director of studies figured out that it was also about eye contact. So the students want to know that you're not that you notice them, and that's one way of doing that. In an online classroom, it can be a little bit more difficult, but it's still very, very important to make sure that we're looking at the students and the students are looking at us, and we're there, because it establishes our connection. Another thing is, in a face-to-face classroom, it's a good idea to ask the weaker students to sit at the front of the class. If they are here, for us it's easier to nominate them and to involve them, because at the back of the class it's easy for them to hide. And the other thing is, if we're monitoring, and by monitoring I mean moving around the classroom and making sure the students are doing the work, but also looking at their errors and looking at where they are, how they are, and things like that. So when we're monitoring, it's easier for us to see what's happening at the front of the class. So we want to see the students, the weaker students there. And definitely nominating weaker students to answer easier questions. And this is linked to my previous point. If you're monitoring, and if you see that the weaker students are making mistakes or are doing something correctly, actually, then you can ask those weaker students for the things they got right. I often, have a handout in my hand, and I make a note of where they got the answers right. So I ask them for those, just to motivate them. I will talk about monitoring quite a lot in this session, because I do this in all the teach training I do. I personally think monitoring is very important, because when we move around the classroom and when we actually look into the students' handouts, we first of all see if they are doing the right task, or maybe they didn't understand our instructions and we need to correct our instructions. Secondly, we can see where they are in the task, and we can find out when we need to stop the students. I myself often ask my students, so have you finished? Are you ready for feedback? Which is, if I am monitoring, I know when to stop the activity. I don't need this question. So it is kind of an awkward question. And finally, we can see where the students are making mistakes and later correct that. However, there is another very important factor, and that's for the students who are shy or weak, or the students who are less motivated. When we come up to them, we stand next to them, possibly even establish eye contact. We show them a little bit of support, and we can even help them. We can correct their mistakes, give prompts, give ideas, and that will motivate them even more. And this is, again, linked to my next point of intervening during pair work and prompting weaker students. If we see that some students are weaker and are not participating in the pair work, one of the strategies I have is I come up to that pair and I listen to this more dominant student speaking, and I say, so what does your partner think about that? And they say, well, I don't know. And I say, well, then ask. And there's a number of strategies like this which we can use to involve the students more and make sure they are working more and much better. So in an online, this is all very relevant to a face-to-face classroom, but personally, I don't know what will happen in September, and we're all very much hoping that we will come back into the face-to-face classrooms, but we might have to stay online, or some teachers and some schools may choose to stay online. And in this environment, it's very important to, again, make sure the students are there and are present. And I always have this contract with the students, which says, like an informal contract, which says, if we want to participate, we keep cameras and sound on at all times, unless there is, something urgent or something else. And this way we can make sure there is some presence. And I know that we have to navigate between the screens and we have to look at the handouts and everything, but it's important to constantly look back at the students' videos and see what they are showing us. The other thing is, it comes back to monitoring. And here at our school, we've elaborated a system which helps us monitor what the students are doing when they're working online. So I'm going to show this to you, and please don't worry. When you receive your certificate, you will also receive my slides. So Macmillan Education will be sending emails, and you will get all my slides with all of the information and all of the links and the handouts. So don't worry too much about making notes or about me sharing the slides. So what I wanted to show you is this. We create Google Drive folders for groups, and in each of the Google Drive folders, we create a file for the students. Okay, you have the link in case you want to follow the link later. So we've created a file for each individual students. They know that every lesson they open their file and they work there. So this is what it looks like. In one of the lessons, the students had to read the text and find the synonyms to some of the words. So I'm going to show you what it looks like in the real Google Drive. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so looks like this. Yes. So this is one of the lessons. This is lesson 2. And all of the students have their files. So they go each to their file and say, I am Anastasia. I am here, and I am working in my file. So my task is to look at the phrases and find the synonyms from the words in blue. And I need to type them here. So while looking for the synonyms, this is what she actually did. Yeah, I type the synonyms which I found as a student. As a teacher, I have all of those files open on my computer. I am navigating between the files. I move between the files to see what the students are doing there, to see where they are and whether they are making mistakes. And sometimes, it's nice to say, oh, Anastasia, I see you're doing a very good job. Or, oh, okay, Kate, you've done so much, and things like that. A little bit of social engagement and praise, just to make sure the students know you are monitoring in the files. It may sound familiar to you, or it may be rather complex. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I'll give you my contact details at the end of the presentation, and I'll be happy to tell you more about how it works. So that's monitoring, that's the files. And the other thing that's very important is using the board, whether that's the whiteboard in a face-to-face classroom or an online whiteboard. So just a couple of tips for you. First of all, write in big letters. We often fall into the trap of wanting to include a lot of information on the whiteboard. And some of our students will have a problem with the eyesight, or maybe just not be focused enough. And so they will be too shy to say this. So it's important to write in big letters. It's important to keep the board organized and use different colors. And in a lot of cases, whenever I want a formula or a timeline or something like that, I actually ask my students to write the formula or to draw the timeline instead of doing it for them, for the following reason. A timeline or a formula is a visual representation of what's happening in my head. Their timeline is a visual representation of what's happening in their heads. And this way, for me as a teacher, it's easier to look at their pictures and to decipher what they have designed, rather than me asking them to decipher my visual representation. So that's one of the things I often recommend. I also say that it's a good idea to print instructions and put them onto the board or on the slide if you're teaching online, just because weaker students sometimes get distracted, don't follow fast enough, and things like that. So if we have instructions on the slide or on the board, they can keep referring to those instructions and do the right task. It's also important to have instructions on the handout, but that goes without saying. And the other thing I often, if not always, insist on is when doing feedback on any kind of task, is always sharing answer keys. So sending them or giving them on paper and noting down the answers on the board or on the slide. So in addition to speaking, we need to give students a visual record of the answers. Why? Imagine we have a gap-fill task with 10 sentences, and the strongest student is giving us the answers. So number 1 is this, number 2 is this, number 3 is this, 4 is this. And the strongest student is already on number 5, but the weaker student is still on number 3. And they're processing the information, especially if there is a mistake, they correct it, but they've already lost us and they skip a couple of answers. So I always want to give answers on a handout. Okay, so let's move on from the whiteboard to grouping. And here's a question for you. How do you group your students? Do you group the stronger students together, weaker students together, or do you mix stronger, weaker together? Tell me in the chat, which one do you use most often? Okay, excellent. Mix. Great. Okay, I had the same answers in the first session, which I was giving in the morning, and it's very interesting. And I do quite a lot of reading on that. And what I often discover is there is no right or wrong here in response to this question. If we want the students to help each other, I would probably mix them. But if we want the students to progress at their level, I often have stronger students working together and doing a more complex task, which I'll show you later, and having weaker students working together and having an easier task. An important point, which I've put down on the slides so that I don't forget it, weaker students are more likely to participate in small groups, only because in pair work, for them, it will be impossible to avoid having to say something. If there is a bigger group, a group of 3, a group of 4, they can keep quiet, they can be shy, they won't have to say anything. In a small group, they will. So that gives us a little more engagement from the students. So those are the key concepts from the classroom management, which can help us with differentiating instruction. And I also want to say a couple of words about motivation, because like I said, motivation is more relevant when we talk about the students of the higher level as well. Let's not forget about them. It's not always about helping the weaker ones. So a couple of tricks for you. And the first one is all about rapport. We all know that rapport helps teach more productive lessons. And there is a theory in psychology that we learn better from the people we like. Normally, this means that if we meet a person, if we like this person, we pick up things from them. We can pick up words, intonations, gestures. We can pick up the music they like and different things like that. So if our students like us, they're more likely to learn from us. One of the ways of helping them like us is showing a lot of interest in their lives. Remembering little things like how many children they have, their children's names, where they went on holiday, what they did last year, last weekend, and things like that. They will feel cared for, and this will increase the rapport. The other thing is nominating all students equally. I said earlier that we need to nominate the weaker students for the easier tasks, but we need to remember about nominating the stronger students as well, because without that, they will feel that their answers are not valued. And here, what we say is, or what I sometimes do, if I am unable to control to make sure I've nominated everyone, I have a list of the students and I put little dots next to their names every time I've nominated them. An important point, which I talked about in my webinar in May, is feedback. So when we give feedback on the students' performance, it's important to make sure we're not comparing the students to each other. We want to make sure that we are commenting on the students' progress. It means how much better they've become in comparison to yesterday or last week or a month ago. And this is one of the most powerful tools in helping the students actually progress better. This is closely connected to my next point of the amount of praise for stronger students and weaker students. First of all, there can be too much praise, and this can actually be very harmful, because if you constantly praise the students, excellent, well done, good job, they stop valuing this. They understand that you will say this in response to anything, and they become less motivated. If we have a little joke at our school here, and we say, no, there should be no smile before Christmas, which is an overstatement, of course, but if the students haven't deserved the praise, we should not be giving it to them. Here, we want to look at the level of task, the level of challenge, and choose the right words. Again, this is what I was talking about in my webinar, which I did for Macmillan in May, which you can find in the webinar archive. Personalizing the students' work helps with creating a positive atmosphere as well. I will be giving you examples of how this can be done later as part of activities. But I'll just say that this doesn't only help with motivation, but it also helps with retaining the language. And finally, let's reward what is good and rather than punish what is bad, because if we focus on the wrong things or on the bad things, the students become less motivated. I've included a little post-it note there, a picture. And here, by this, I'm trying to say that sometimes I have those little post-it notes in my hand, and I write nice little messages to my students. Something like, well done on this homework, or an excellent task, you made no mistakes, or sometimes even, oh, nice nails. This, again, gives them a little bit more attention and helps them stay more motivated. But all those things are about classroom management, motivation, and rather abstract tasks. They're not practical things we do with activities. So let's now jump straight to an example, and let's see how we can adapt the activities so that the students benefit from them. Here there is a link which you can access. I'm going to send it into the chat. If you give me 1 second, well, not 1 second, maybe 1 minute. If you go to this link, you will see a gapped text, which is an example of an activity I do with my students. And this illustrates the whole concept of differentiated instruction and would help a lot. Okay, I have the link. Let's put it here. All right, give me a minute. Yes, over here. Okay, you'll be able to access it later as well, and I'm going to show it on the slide. So if you can't access Google Docs, that's totally fine. So here, this is a text which we use for various purposes, but let's imagine we use it for dictation. Do you do dictation in your class? I sometimes do that. I sometimes and even often do that. So when we do this type of activity, we can adapt it and depending on the student's level. So if we have a strong student, this student gets a blank piece of paper, and as we are reading the text, the student has to make notes and the student has to reconstruct the text. And they have to be able to write fast and then reconstruct well. If we have a student who is somewhere in between, this student would probably get a gapped text, in which I would take the text and remove some of the words which I'd like my students to focus on. And the only thing they have to do is listen to me reading the text. And while those stronger students are writing the full text, those students in the middle fill in the gaps with the words they hear. Now, we can have even weaker students who need more support. And in this case, I do something like this. So I take a text, and instead of making gaps, I do a multiple choice activity. So I give them several options they have to choose from. All of the options have to make sense, and the students have to listen carefully. When I do this kind of activity, I let my students choose what they want to do. So say the most difficult activity will be on a red handout. The activity in the middle will be on a yellow handout, and the activity which is the easiest one will be on a green handout. And sometimes I give the handouts to the students. I decide who does what. Sometimes I let them choose. And by this, I say even stronger students sometimes might not be in the mood to do a lot of work. They might not be interested in this task. And so they take the easier activity and we let them get some rest like this. Okay, so that's one idea. Another idea for you is over here. Have a look at this text and tell me what you notice about this text. Why is it unusual? Okay, so Why is this text unusual? What do you notice about it? Yes, that's correct. Yes, so in this text, there are mistakes. Okay, and I've taken this from a young learner's classroom, and it is a joke, but I use it as an error correction task. And when we want to set up this error correction task, we have a number of options, we have a number of things we can ask the students to do. So remember the text. A text contains a number of mistakes. When we adjust the task to vary the level of difficulty, we can do the following. For some students, we can give a handout with the instructions which tell the students how many wrong words there are before they begin, so they know how many they have to find. If the students are even weaker, we can indicate which lines the wrong words are in, and by this, help them be more confident. Sometimes we can stage the activity. So in the first stage, the students would have to find and underline the wrong words. And in the second stage, the students would have to, so after we check that they found all the words and the words are correct, they will have to get feedback, or they will actually correct the wrong words, and later on we will do feedback. For the weakest students, and in the morning session, I had someone who said they teach classes where they have B1 and C1 level students, which I personally cannot imagine. I think it would be very difficult. But for a group like this, you can underline the wrong words and ask the students to correct them for B1 level students, yeah? And then for C1 or for higher level students, you would give a simple task with no marks. Finally, give students a jumbled list of the correct words to replace the wrong ones. This is just to help them find where the mistakes are and possibly help them look for the possible options for error correction. And lots of other things like that. We have ways of adapting the tasks, and they can all help our students benefit from our lessons. I'd like you to try and do something like this. So I've taken this controlled practice activity from Language Hub Intermediate, which is a nice course book for young adults, recently published by Macmillan. So this is a controlled practice activity on modal verbs, and the standard activity is you have two options, choose one. And we focus on the meaning here, right? How can you adapt this activity for students who are stronger and for students who are weaker? I'd like to hear your ideas. Please send them into the chat. I'll just be quiet for a minute. Okay. Modify the number of options, good. Write the synonyms, okay. My question is, how can you adapt this activity so that stronger students get a more difficult task and weaker students get an easier task? So no options for stronger ones, yeah, simple gap fill. Change tenses according to the level. Oh, that's a nice one. I hadn't thought of that. So you give them the infinitive and they have to use that in the correct form. Good. Yeah. I'm going to give you some of my options and let's have a look together. I've used the first example. Yeah, we don't have to / mustn't be competitive to have fun at sport. And here we are. So we can remove the options, which is what you said, gap fill. And if it's too difficult, we remove the options and provide all of the options in one box at the top of the page along with the instructions. So it looks like we be competitive to have fun at sport. We can turn it into an error correction task. So we tell the students there is an error in every sentence or maybe in some sentences. And we can jumble up the words, so the students have to construct a sentence. And if in the first and the second option we're working on meaning, here and jumbling up the words, we're working more on the form. We can turn sentences into the prompts, and this is a rather difficult task because here the students have to add prepositions, articles, and things like that, but also add the actual modal verb, and this has to be given as part of instructions. Finally, the most complex task, the most difficult option here, is dictating the sentences. I call it a banana activity. I'm sure it wasn't my invention, but while the weaker students are working on the choosing between the two options, students in the middle are working on correcting the errors. The strongest students listen to us and we dictate. We banana be competitive to have fun at sport. And the students have to write the sentence and the students have to choose the correct modal verb. So an additional challenge, because doing it by listening to something, doing error correction through listening is really, really difficult. So let's move on and let's have a look at some other ideas. Here about adapting listening and the reading tasks. Let's start from listening. And here is another example, but this time it's from Language Help Pre-Intermediate. And this is a simple listening activity in which the students have to listen for keywords, for some specific information. How can we adapt it? I'm gonna jump straight to my ideas here. So first we can give 2 or 3 options for weaker students, and they have to choose. For stronger students, we can turn the statements into questions, and by doing this, we change the focus of the task. Because by doing this, we're asking the students to listen for detailed information rather than specific information. For the strongest students, we use open-ended tasks. So listen to the announcement and make notes about the prize, which is question 1, how to win the prize, which is question 2, the clothes department, which is question 3, and so on. So that's the task. For weaker students, in case they need some additional support, what we can do is give them the script and let them listen and read at the same time. This will kill the whole purpose of the listening, of course, because by doing this, we let the students read rather than listen only. To the weakest students, I would give the script with the answers already underlined in there after they listen. Or actually, it doesn't have to be for the weakest students only. We can do this for all students, and I personally often insist on having the listening script for listening tasks. And finally, sometimes, because we're all so tech savvy and because we have online classrooms these days, what you can do is we take the listening track and we send it to the students' phones or we send it into the chat. And every student listens to the track on their phone or on their computer. They can pause if they need to make notes of the answers. They can listen twice if they want, so they choose the level of challenge they want to have. And they really enjoy it because this is some additional responsibility for them, and it's always nice. If we talk about reading texts, so something like this, we have some standard reading tasks provided by the course books, and we can either adapt those tasks or design some additional tasks. And sometimes there are simple on-the-spot activities which we don't even have to spend the time preparing. I'll give you some examples. So for the fast finishers particularly, we can ask them to design 1 or 2 additional questions to go with the text. And later, we can either give it for homework or simply check it with the students and get their responses. And we can ask the fast finishers to provide some response to the text. So either draw a picture or a summary statement or something like that. We could let the students read the text aloud as an additional stage. And this would help us practice pronunciation. We could let the students look through the text and select several words they would like to learn. So they highlight the words in the text, they take a dictionary, they find out the meaning, and they teach each other. And here we can definitely ask the stronger students to look for more difficult words. And we can assign the words. We can give the weaker students some easier words, and we can give the stronger students some words which are more difficult, and they work with those. And one thing I like doing, and again, one thing I insist on doing when I do teach training courses, is giving out texts with the answers highlighted in the text. Because when the students have done a comprehension checking task, they have given answers, we've done feedback. But what if they didn't really get why the answer is what it is? What if they didn't follow? And so when we give out this text, the students can, take a couple of minutes, see where they had mistakes, and see why the answers are what they are. And it really helps them understand and develop the skills much, much better. I wanted to ask you to do a couple of things, but we don't have the time for this. So I'm just going to move on to the speaking lessons. And in a speaking lesson, there's a number of things which we definitely need to do. And regardless of the level, we always have to give some preparation time. So we set the task and we tell the students, this is what you're going to speak about. Now, take some time, think of the ideas, and think of the language you might use. And here, the stronger students might work on their own or in groups, and they might come up with their own ideas and their own language. While for the weaker students, we could provide the prompts with either ideas or prompts with the language, depending what we want them to do. For the stronger students, we can provide an additional task. So if weaker students have to brainstorm like 3-4 ideas, the stronger students will have to brainstorm 5 and additional arguments. I already said it at the beginning of the webinar, and I'm going to say that again. Weaker students work better in smaller groups, and stronger students work better in bigger groups. So pair work for weaker students, they have no chance but to say something. In bigger groups, dominant students will try and dominate, so they will have to speak more, and it's a nice variety. If we have a mixture, if we mix the students, so stronger, weaker, I sometimes assign roles. So I say a stronger student will have to be a conversation manager, and I give them a number of ideas on how they can manage the conversation, but it's their task to make sure everybody says something and shares their ideas in the conversation. Shy students could listen for ideas, make notes, and report later, and things like that. There's a variety of things we can do with regard to this. If we talk about grammar vocabulary tasks, we've already seen some examples. We've done one with the controlled practice. Yeah. We sometimes have weaker students who haven't really understood a grammatical point or a lexical item enough. So we could ask the stronger students for additional examples, or to design an additional task, so like design a sentence with a gap. I often do more error correction with stronger students, only because they are already motivated and they are already there. So they probably need to focus on little aspects of connected speech, little aspects of the intonation, rather than the form in general. I like using fast finishers. I like giving them the answer keys, they check themselves, and then they later check the work of the weaker students, and so they're all involved. And this way, especially if they get on well, the weaker students can ask the stronger students for clarification, and this helps them learn better. If we have fast finishers, we can ask them to write 2-3 additional sentences to illustrate the grammatical point or the lexis. Remember I mentioned personalization earlier, and this is one of the powerful tools here. And here we can ask the students to rewrite the sentences so that they are true for them. It won't always be possible, but we can try and do that. For example, we don't have to be competitive to have fun at sport. I personally don't agree with this. I think we have to be competitive to have fun at sport. So I rewrite the sentence, yeah? And we do this with the other things. Again, all will depend on whether it's possible to do it with this particular task. But this way, when we personalize the language, the students aren't doing a task about some gym, they're doing a task about themselves. So the language stays with them. I'm going to say that again, because it's one of my favorite things in teaching. We should monitor carefully, and we need to see where the students have made mistakes. If we do this, in feedback, we can avoid asking to clarify every single sentence, but we only ask about the most difficult sentences, and this helps us save a lot of time. A couple more ideas for speaking and writing tasks. I think some repeat from my previous points, but in a speaking lesson, if we have the students who finish earlier, we can sometimes, or a writing lesson, we can sometimes regroup the students and we can ask them to do the same task again, but with a different partner and possibly get a different outcome. We can ask the students, the strongest students, to write more or to say more, and the weaker students will have to write less or say less. And lots of other things which you can read on this slide, because you will get the slides after the webinar. Finally, like I said, I don't know whether I will have to teach online or face-to-face when the academic year starts. And if we have to teach online, this makes the gap even bigger, because in addition to the actual study, the normal study skills, students have to master the tech skills. So I think it's very important to spend some time on initial training. Something like, if we work with Zoom, the students, I spent some time training students so that things become automatic. I tell them, send a yes into the chat, click on the green yes, mute yourself, unmute yourself, and we do it until we can do it at a very fast pace, everyone. Some students are less confident when it comes to typing, and in those cases, I let those students make notes on their paper, but I often ask them to take a picture and send that either to my phone or my email or into the chat. And again, an important point I mentioned earlier, when we do feedback. For feedback, we always have to have a visual record of the answers. So I either prepare the answer keys and send them into the chat, or either before the students check themselves or after they check themselves, or I write the answers as I am eliciting them from the students onto the slide. And let me state the obvious, have a task for fast finishers, even if it's a simple write one or two additional sentences to illustrate the point. Let's be careful with this, because sometimes if they finished fast, they might want a minute or two just to hibernate, and it's important to give them this chance, and it's important to value their preferences too. And I think I'm gonna be finishing here, and I'm just gonna show you the slide with my contact details. So if you have any questions about this or about anything, feel free to contact me at kp@grade.ua. This is my work email. And I will be very happy to help. Don't worry about the slides. The slides will be sent to you by Macmillan along with the certificate. So just please be patient. I'm just going to take a moment to say thank you very much, everyone, for listening to me. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Is that correct, Federica?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Kate, for a great session. As you can see, people really loved you, and of course we did too. So thank you so much. It was super useful. It was really, really practical, which is what we really want. And thanks everyone for attending. So we do have a couple of minutes for questions. As you know, some people were also, a lot of people actually, were also watching from Facebook. So we got a question from Mohammed from Facebook,
Okay.
who asked, what would you recommend to someone that has more than 70 students at different levels? How would you bridge that gap?
Okay, that's a really, really difficult situation. And I honestly would have to spend quite a lot of time planning my course. I don't think I would be able to give a lot of individual attention to the students. I would definitely use the differentiated tasks, which I mentioned earlier. So red, green, and yellow for the level of challenge. Um, I would group the students into stronger, weaker, and I would let them work together and teach each other. Um, what else? It's hard for me to answer because I honestly have never worked like this. But yeah, it's an interesting question to think about.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's always a challenge, really, because there's always pros and cons to every kind of classroom, I think.
Absolutely.
And a question that really relates to that
Uh-huh.
came from Click Meeting, actually. It's good to see you two guys. I'm so happy that you managed to come. Would you give students, because obviously they're at different levels, would you give them time to work at their own pace, or would you give them the information and then time them?
All will depend on the task and on my aim. Sometimes I will give them a time limit if I want them to focus. Um, in most cases, I will give them enough time to cope with the task, and I will give some additional challenge to the stronger students or to those who finish faster.
Thank you. And there was also a really nice question from Monica asking, how do you mark students when they have different level of tasks, like different, yeah.
I have answer keys. I give out the answer keys to the groups or to the students, and they check themselves. And then we discuss the most problematic points as open class.
Thank you. And there was another consideration coming from Facebook asking, what terms would you use instead of stronger and weaker students? Because especially with them, if they take a sneak peek on our papers and so on, they have a negative connotation, really. So, what would you call them even when you try to give feedback to them?
I would comment on the tasks and not on the students. And this goes back to my point about letting them choose what they want to work on, because sometimes weaker students will feel motivated and then they will want to attempt at more complex tasks. So, I would probably, put little stars next to the tasks. So, like 1 star for simpler task, 2 stars for something in the middle. I'm probably sometimes use funny pictures like I used for grouping, yeah, or like this, or somebody who's weaker. But for the tasks, not for the students. Or if we talk about weights, yeah, so like a smaller weight and a bigger weight to identify the tasks, not the students.
Thank you. And I know that some really great feedback is coming from Facebook. They loved your answers. So
Great, thank you.
there you go. Thanks everyone for sending these questions through. And a lot of questions are coming in from here as well. There was Shabam asking, do you think that it's actually effective to pair weaker students and stronger students, because they might not learn as much? But
Yeah.
over to you.
Yeah, agree. I am very careful when I do this because it often leads to demotivation in stronger students because they simply get bored when they speak to weaker students, especially if this is somebody who's very much goal oriented and they don't want to spend their time teaching someone else. So I'm very careful and I don't do that very often.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question because
Okay.
it's at 9 p.m. for Kate. So we're really grateful that you hosted this session at this time. Thank you so much. Rose was asking, what would you do with students with diverse learning needs? Because obviously everyone has gaps with their knowledge. So how would you bridge the gap with those students as well?
I think this can be done through study groups. And by this I mean lessons in which some students will work on some complex reading tasks while the other students are working on, say, revising past continuous. And then, of course, I'd have to monitor both groups and would have to see how they do there. Um, the other thing is homework. I think if we know what our students need, we can give them some additional homework to fill the gaps which they have. And possibly through error correction, if during delayed error correction we throw in examples of what some students have gaps in, even if it's not related to the task, we can do constant revision of those points, and that would help the students.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. And as I said at the beginning, we really, really love the practical take of your sessions, and people have been saying the very same. So thank you so much for a great session as usual. And thank you so much for, helping us in supporting everyone as we go back to school or have been going back to school. It's great to have you. Thank you so much, Kate, on behalf of everyone here at Macmillan, and I'm sure all of the teachers attending.
Thank you very much, Federica, for helping me with this, for hosting this. And thank you very much, Macmillan, for letting me do this webinar. And a big, big thank you to everyone. I know you all come from different parts of the world, different time zones, and it's your precious hour. So thank you for spending it with me.
Thank you so much. And also thanks to Will Rickson. He just joined our team at Macmillan, and he's been doing a great job with hosting the first webinars. He kicked off our series and it was absolutely great. So thanks, Will.